Chapter 47. Jaren Calivan. The whirlwind disappeared into the darkness. Jaren rolled away from Treadon and Ellie. The pain in his leg had ebbed away into shock. His breathing was labored, and his heartbeat was too fast. He kept his eyes averted from the body in the center of the floor, not sure if he'd see a monster or his father. His entire life, he'd wanted the man's approval, his acceptance. A sharp pain of sorrow kept his arms wrapped around his chest. Abigail and Rachel slammed their way through the door. Jaren switched his gaze to Rachel. "They're gone," Rachel said. "The Fenris disintegrated, kind of like the finger snap." She had a bleeding cut on her shoulder and a bruise on her cheek. She looked amazing, tall and fierce and strong, and everything he'd always feared he wasn't. He didn't deserve her, but he'd always pretended he was too good. He regretted that. What happened in here? Rachel made her way to him as he pushed himself up into a sitting position. "Is everyone okay?" Treadon asked, helping Ellie sit up. He kept his hand over the wound in his arm. Black tendrils were working their way up through his veins. Jaren could see the skin turning dark at Treadon's elbow. "Just so you know, that's a really stupid question." Jaren grimaced when he tried to straighten his leg. His shin appeared misshapen through the khakis, a lump that could only be bone. "Good to see you're still you." Treadon slapped Jaren on the shoulder, but it was a half-hearted slap. Treadon kept his arm tight against his side. Jaren swore. "We should get you to the hospital." Treadon tried to help him up. "You need to get her to the hospital." Jaren pointed to Ellie. Ellie lay on the floor, breath coming in shallow gasps. Her eyes closed. Her color had leached out of her face. Her lips were a strange shade of purple. Her chest rose and fell in a sporadic rhythm. One side of her face was red and scraped from the whirlwind. "No," Abigail said. She stood in the doorway. "There would be too many questions we couldn't answer at a hospital. We'll take her to our house. Gabe can help her." "Where is Gabe?" Treadon and Jaren exchanged a glance. "He went to fight the other guy. There was an explosion." "I'll go look for him, and I'll pull the car up to the front." Abigail left. "Why isn't she healing?" Treadon brushed a strand of hair away from Ellie's face. Jaren looked away from the intimate moment, feeling his friend's pain, knowing he didn't have a way to help. His gaze landed on his dad's body, and he felt like his chest was caving in on itself. "I don't know, but the sooner we get out of here, the better we'll all feel." "What about your leg?" Rachel asked. "Ellie's too sick to help herself." "I don't think she can heal you." "Treadon can fix it." Despite everything, Jaren reveled in the look of shock on Treadon's face. The guy needed to learn to fake confidence. It was a useful skill. Treadon scooted closer to Jaren and placed a hand on his broken leg. Jaren couldn't keep the hiss of pain in. "I don't know what to do," Treadon said. "It's not rocket science." Jaren spoke through gritted teeth. Either the shock was wearing off or the pain was getting worse. "Rachel will hold my hand, and you'll shove it back where it's supposed to be. On the count of 3. Ready?" Treadon nodded and put both hands on Jaren's leg. For some reason, Jaren thought Treadon would fight harder, try to pass the job onto someone else. But the guy was really going to do it. Jaren squeezed Rachel's hand. She wrapped the other arm around his shoulder and put pressure on him, her strength holding him up, making him brave enough to start the count. 1, 2, ow! Treadon didn't wait for 3. His hands clamped on Jaren's leg, moving with a confidence Jaren hadn't expected, like he knew what he was doing. Like putting a bone back into place had been written into his DNA. The bone crunched back into place. Jaren had to curl up and close his eyes, rocking back and forth. Rachel placed a hand on his head, telling him it was going to be okay, but he could barely hear her, barely feel her through the pain. He found the strength to open his eyes when he heard Treadon retch all over the office floor. Jaren took a deep breath. "You're such a wimp." He didn't know where Treadon's confidence had come from, but he was grateful for it. He could tell the bone was back in place, still broken, but at least not trying to break through his skin. "Okay." Rachel stood and brushed the dust and Fenris remnants from her hands like she'd finished cleaning the kitchen. "Let's get you out of here." He reached up and grabbed Rachel's hand. She pulled, and he put his weight on his good leg, hopping to her side, leaning into her body with unnecessary exaggeration. "I said I'd protect you, and I'll always support you, but I'm not carrying you." Rachel pushed him so he balanced on his own. He needed her. He wanted her. He had always wanted to be the strong one, the one who protected and took care of her, but he'd been wrong. They could take care of each other. He looked in her eyes. She reached up and touched his face. It wasn't the right time. It never seemed like the right time. but life felt too unpredictable, too out of control to wait another second. Jaren leaned in, and Rachel met him halfway, their lips pressing together. The cherry chapstick took him back to an era he never lived in, but had always loved. A crashing sound came from behind them, and both he and Rachel jumped. Jaren was aware enough to stumble back, with small hops on his good leg, Rachel keeping him from falling over. What the hell? Treadon had still been leaning over Ellie, trying to get her to respond. He ran to stand by them, his body tensed, ready for a fight. He didn't have a weapon, not even a pen. A creature was crawling into the room, gripping desperately to the edge of the broken windows, a hunched form that moved like a wounded animal. "I thought you said the Fenris ran away," Jaren said to Rachel. "That's not a Fenris." "Gabe." Treadon was the first to recognize the form as a man. He darted forward and grasped Gabe's wrist before he lost his grip. The man looked like he'd survived a battle zone, or a meat grinder. Blood dripped down one side of his head from a rip in his ear. His clothes were covered with a gray dust, and the smell of smoke lingered on him. Treadon steadied Gabe as he wavered in the opening. Gabe's eyes took in the scene. What happened here? "That's a long story," Jaren couldn't resist. "Do you want the Cliff Notes or the Director's Edition?" Gabe stumbled forward when he saw Ellie slumped on the floor. The bleeding had slowed, but her wound still oozed. "Get her off the floor," Gabe said. "It's black hematite. It's weakening her. Get her out of here, now." Despite looking like a guy ready to collapse, he sure could give an order. Treadon ran back across the room and lifted Ellie from the floor. The golden specks in the black marble floor stilled, puddling around Treadon's feet. Ellie groaned with the movement, but being pulled away from the floor seemed to make a difference as the bleeding in her stomach stopped. Gabe hobbled over to Treadon's side. "Let's get her to my office. Tell me what happened on the way." Treadon stepped out the door with Ellie in his arms. He held her like she was weightless. Gabe motioned for he and Rachel to go next, but as Jaren hopped toward the door, Gabe stumbled to the side, leaning on the wall for support. "Help him," Jaren said, nodding to Rachel. "I can hop fine. I used to cheat at skipping when they graded us in kindergarten. I only ever used one leg." "You're such a nerd." Rachel shook her head at him, but slipped over and put Gabe's arm over her shoulder to help him out the door. Gabe and Rachel were in the doorway, Jaren just behind him, when he heard his name. "Jaren." It was barely a whisper. He froze in the doorway. He hunched his shoulders, not knowing whether to hope or to scream. The voice came again, a little stronger. "Please, Jaren, I have to tell you something." Jaren didn't know if it was paranoia, exhaustion, stupidity, or strength, but he wanted this. He needed this, and he needed to do it alone. He reached forward and slipped his hand into Gabe's leather jacket pocket. He gripped the ring for the motorcycle key just as Gabe turned. Jaren wished he could apologize, hoped there would be time for apologies later. Then he balanced himself on his good leg and shoved Rachel and Gabe into the hall. They both stumbled, not expecting it, recovering too slowly. The sight of Rachel's face as he slammed the office door and flipped the lock into place was the scariest thing he'd faced all night. She hated being locked out, especially when she knew he was in pain. He hopped around until he was facing his father. Xander Calivan's head was lifted an inch off the floor, one hand stretched toward him, pleading. Jaren hopped forward and stood over his father's dying body. "I'm sorry," Xander said. "If you believe nothing else, please believe I am sorry." Jaren studied the wound in his dad's chest. The knife was buried halfway up the blade. Blood seeped out around the white blade, now stained with red fingertips. A puddle of blood pooled around Jaren's foot, soaking his dad's usually pristine dress shirt. If someone had asked him yesterday, he would have said his father had a lifetime of sins to ask forgiveness for, and he would have given that forgiveness in a heartbeat. If only his dad had asked him. Now, Jaren wasn't even sure what his dad was sorry for. Why? There were so many ways to end that sentence, Jaren couldn't go on. "I wanted to protect you, but I was too late. I'd given them too much. I wanted to undo what they'd done to you. I was a coward, but I can give you what I have. Maybe you can help Vox finish what he started." Jaren used his good leg to lower himself down next to his father. "But you're going to be okay. The dagger shoved the demon out of you. Gabe said that was the only way." Rachel's pounding on the door was distant. He wanted to tell her to go away. He wanted her to wrap him up in her arms. It's too late for me. I can't undo what I've done." "What are you talking about?" Jaren looked at his dad's hand, still extended toward him. "You want to undo what you did to Ellie? To that poor girl?" Xander's eyes followed Jaren's pointing finger to the stone pillar in the middle of the room. He squinted in confusion. "What girl?" "Dad, do you not remember the girl you just tortured on a stone altar and pulled a white dagger in your chest out of her arm?" Xander's mouth formed an O, and he looked back at Jaren. He must have found her. The descendant of Adiona. He'd been searching for lifetimes for the power she possessed. "What are you talking about?" Xander took a shuddering breath that was punctuated by the sound of liquid. Xander choked and sputtered. He turned his head to the side and spit blood onto the floor. "I don't have time to explain, but you deserve to know 2 things. I see you now. I see you as my son." The words didn't bring Jaren comfort. They made him angry. "I've always been your son, and your mother deserves to know. You need to find her." "Let me get you out of here. I'll call an ambulance." "It's too late for me. I can only hope that what I was able to do was enough to save you in the end." "It's not too late. You're okay. It's not too late." Jaren couldn't stop the tears that slipped down his cheeks. He wiped at them angrily. "My personal laptop is hidden in a compartment in my desk. Press the lower panel 3 times and turn the knob to the right. Your mother's information is under the file Selena. Find her." "Dad." "Get the computer." The desk seemed 100 miles away, unreachable. His dad was right there. He could reach out and touch him. Jaren finally gripped his dad's outstretched hand. Squeezing, Xander squeezed back, shaking their grip up and down. "I am proud of you. You have the power to do great things. I only wish I could be there to watch." "Dad." "Go grab it. I'll show you how to turn it on." Jaren knew his dad. There would be no discussion until he did what he was asked. Jaren balanced on one leg as he stood up. He hopped over to the desk and felt the paneling beneath the drawers. He followed his dad's instructions, and a secret compartment opened, a laptop and power cord inside. That was it. He pulled them out and lifted them up to show his dad. Xander lay flat on his back, in a pool of his own blood. His eyes were open. Both hands were on the handle of the white dagger. "No!" Jaren screamed, throwing himself toward his dad, putting pressure on his broken leg. His strength gave out, and he crashed to the floor, laptop clattering beside him. Xander looked over at Jaren. "When you find her, will you tell her? Tell her I was wrong. Tell her I was sorry in the end." Xander took one last gasp of air and pushed the knife farther into his chest. Jaren watched in horror as his dad's body went rigid. His head dropped to the floor and his hands dropped from the dagger, sagging to the side. All the air was sucked from the room. Jaren lay on his belly, staring at his dad's bloodied hands. There was a splintering sound as Gabe joined Rachel's efforts to get into the room. He couldn't. Jaren couldn't face them right now. He grabbed the laptop and forced himself to his feet. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he walked to the shattered windows. Somehow, he knew the ground would catch him, the same way the mountain had caught the car, the same way the football field was his playground. Jaren stepped to the edge and jumped.